Later on today, Lisa with the Barnabas Group is going to send you a quick survey. If you could just take a few minutes and give us some feedback, we're trying to get some information. Besides some information on the seminar today, just some information about timing, days of the week, things like that, so we know how to plan better. But we'll be communicating with you. Again, our goal is to bring valuable information and help to leaders everywhere, and so we're looking forward to that today. I'm really excited to have Dr. Sears. This is our first virtual seminar that we're doing, and just really excited. The title of the seminar is How Nonprofits and Ministries Can Respond and Adapt in the COVID-19 Crisis. And obviously, that's a relevant topic. There is so much information, but in my conversation with Dr. Sears, he's gonna bring some very practical help and practical insight to us. And so I'm really excited about the conversation today. We are recording this conversation, and we will send this. I just got that recording. We will send this to everyone that's attending, so you can have record of that. And then Barnabas may present this at another time, but it is recorded. So I'm going to begin with a word of prayer, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sears, and we are off and running. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for technology. Thank you for the opportunity we have to gather together. Thank you for the Barnabas Group and its commitment to connect people and encourage people and impact the world. And I just thank you for the privilege each of us have to be connected. Father, today we just ask that you would be with Dr. Sears as he presents, as he challenges us. Thank you for who he is and how you've positioned him today for this crisis and what we're all dealing with and how we're all being affected. Thank you for today. We love you and just commit this time to you in your name. Amen. Dr. Sears, I'm going to hand it over
All
to
right.
you.
Well, thank you, Russ. Yeah, let me go ahead and just get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Share. Here we go. All right. So as Russ mentioned, this webinar is on how nonprofits and ministries can adapt and respond in the COVID-19 crisis. And let me just start us with a quick poll. And if you aren't familiar with how Zoom works, I'm going to pull up a poll. And actually, let me go ahead and stop sharing for the poll, since it's not giving me the poll link. But let me just ask a question. So I'm going to send a poll to you all, and if you all can just respond, you should see it appear on your screen. And there's 3 questions. What type of organization are you with? Is your organization, working from home, largely still serving clients, and are largely, unable to work from home due to the nature of work? And has your organization had to institute layoffs? So. I'll give you all another couple of minutes. It looks like about half of you, or another minute maybe. It looks like about half of you responded. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, it looks like we're at about 88% nonprofits, 12% businesses. Everyone's working almost entirely from home. I didn't know if anyone would be with organizations that are, in a critical nature. Just a few have instituted layoffs, but most haven't, and several are, have to evaluate options, and some aren't sure. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and end polling so I can get into the rest of the presentation, but it's just helpful to understand where folks are during this time. So, all right, so let me skip to the next slide, sorry. So in the chat box, if some of you want to enter what is your biggest concern related to COVID-19, and that could be helpful just to track. So if you want to enter that in, and that would just be some helpful feedback, and I'll go ahead and pull up the chat box and can track that also. and while people, okay, health and safety, donations, continued funding, fundraising, yeah, people are feeling the pain, the financial pain. Continuing to keep our missionaries funded, global travel. Yeah, for global organizations, this hits really hard, and decreased revenue from donations. Yeah, okay, that's helpful. All right, well, I'll go ahead and continue. So a little bit of my background, whenever this first hit, the first sermon I heard was we shouldn't have a spirit of fear, but a spirit of service. And I started praying about that and just thought, how can I use my background in this? So my background's in innovation. I co-founded a research group with one of the fathers of the internet at MIT. I've run an online Christian university that primarily provides online education to those serving the poor, the addicted, and the underserved. And we've partnered with thousands of nonprofits and ministries, and my heart really just goes out to nonprofits and ministries. I mean, I'm a nonprofit also, and how can we help serve the community that around us, and that's a lot of what we thought of. And the other thing that kind of makes us unique is we've had most of our staff as remote workers for the past 12 years, so we've done a lot around that. So that's a little bit of my background. There's actually two inspirational stories I want to talk about. Many of you have heard of John Wycliffe. He translated the first English Bible while on house arrest. So many people would think being stuck in house arrest for several years, what happened is he was advocating for the Catholic Church to translate the Bible from Latin into English. And they were kind of like how Muslims are right now, where Muslims only allow the Quran in Arabic, and it used to be that the Bible was only allowed to be in Latin, and John Wycliffe was advocating for that, and they put him on house arrest. And he had his greatest work while he was on house arrest. He started translating the English Bible, and people finished his work. So that's one story that's inspirational. The other one is Isaac Newton. He was put in quarantine during the plague, and that's whenever he developed some of his best work. He was stuck inside doing nothing but thinking, and he created some of his best work. So I believe that as challenging as this time is, that Esther 4:14 applies, and who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. So that's what I've been praying around, is how God can use the unique gifts that he's given me and my organization during this time. And that's really what we're trying to do with this webinar and some of the other resources we're putting out there. So the outline for this webinar is, first, we're going to focus on relational health. How do you maintain healthy relationships and organizations in a remote work environment? And I know it's easy to overlook that because financial health is the most pressing. I'm going to talk about nonprofit government grants, particularly the CARES Act, which was just passed this past Friday, and it's people have said it's the largest legislation to ever impact nonprofits in the country. And then physical health, so resources for organizations and ministries still serving clients. And we prepared a pretty extensive free COVID-19 course. I've been doing almost nothing but researching materials that would be helpful for nonprofits and ministries the past several weeks, and have pulled that together into that resource. So the first part, how to maintain healthy relationships. So there's this chart here, which is what good management is. So you have concern for results here at the bottom, and then concern for people at the top. And the idea is good management is what they call team management, and you want to have high expectations, but also high caring, high concern for people. Now, part of the reason why this is really relevant right now is many of you have heard of one of the 7 habits foundational principles for the 7 habits of highly effective people, is about making deposits and withdrawals in an emotional bank account. So one of the things we've realized, having run a remote organization for the past 10 years, is that emotional deposits happen much more slowly in a remote work environment. I feel like I build trust and I make deposits, maybe about a fifth of the pace that I would in other times. So I have to be very intentional in that, because what happens is in doing remote work, it can easily drive your organization to this producer Paris management. So what I'm going to be sharing about is some principles of how you can try to address that concern. So that's what this is about. So one of the best practices I would recommend is, and everyone has gotten this who has kids at home during this time, is you have to establish routines. But with your work environment, establish routines to ensure enough live video time. So some organizations will do a 5 or 10 minute team meeting each morning. It could just be a quick prayer or check-in, just so you see that there's other people. But what you really need to do is you need to schedule more intentional time, because the spontaneous time doesn't happen when you're working remotely. So, in terms of relationship building, video is critical. Ensuring all staff have video cameras to use for one-to-one and staff meetings. If you have people who don't have that, it's really important to get. And a lot of people here have been using some of their Zoom backgrounds to help with family privacy issues. As someone had mentioned earlier, it's just on your video feed. You can there's a little section where it shows the video camera, where you can just press the up arrow and then put a background that will provide a background. So if you have kids walking in the background, or someone coming out of the bathroom, or whatever, depending on what your space is like. So the other thing we do as a Christian organization, we alternate every other staff meeting with personal check-ins and prayer time to build relational trust. And we will cover very little business. So we have staff meeting every week, and we alternate, and we try to invest heavily in that. Another thing that's different, and depending on the size of your staff, you may have to do it differently, but if your staff is maybe less than 15 people, an online meeting, what I found is people are much less likely to speak up. So we'll often use what people call the round robin method, where we just go through and each person's called on to ensure everyone participates. And for prayer time, what we do is we just have people, I read the order at the beginning, and I say, you're going to pray for the person who's after you in the order. So that's just an idea of what you could use. The other thing is managing conflict in a remote work environment. I always do conflict via video when possible. I try to do every live interaction I have with staff via video, both to build a relationship and the off chance that conflict might occur. And also just because you can, see if someone's having a bad day, you can see it on their face and things along those lines. And, avoiding conflict in group settings, because it's really hard to manage the emotional dynamic in a Zoom meeting, because it's just hard to track all that. I have a rule. I view doing conflict via email or chat kind of like drinking and driving. It's just something I don't ever do, because the emotional content really isn't conveyed the way you'd like it. And I've been working hard to be very extra courteous, upbeat, and thankful in email, because if someone's having a bad day, they're going to read your email according to how they're feeling at that moment, not how you intended it. So unless you make the email, very positive, it's going to be challenging. So, and with my staff, I'm much more intentional about, asking, how are you feeling about work? How are we doing? How, trying to assess how your emotional bank account's doing, because what can happen is you can have someone on the verge of quitting or on the verge of a meltdown, and because they're remote, you just don't know that. So some of the other things we do, one-to-one supervision meetings using Zoom, staff meetings using Zoom, ad hoc meetings using Zoom. If we have a meeting that other people can't attend, like a faculty meeting, we'll record that. And this is more just for innovation and running a remote office. We do almost everything using Google Docs and Sheets. We have work plans and task lists for staff that allow for collaborative editing. And we found it helpful, just like it's helpful to have structured meeting times, it can be helpful to have more structured task lists, because you're not going to interact with people as often. And we provide a staff meeting agenda document, and we literally, in any given week, I'm probably going to interact with 50 different Google Docs and Google Sheets. And let me just show you, an example of what my work plan looks like. So this is my work plan, and I have my task list here. I have at the top, I have what I call my dashboard, and this is almost like my menu. And then I have hundreds of Google documents that we're using to run. And for each of the people who I supervise, they have a task, a work plan that they'll interact with, and then we'll have some team work plans that they interact with. But the reason why we do things in Google Docs, and a lot of people use Microsoft 365, is it, you know, basically you want to have the web mentality. You don't want to be having a, you know, physical, or not physical, a server mentality. You want to have a web mentality in how you're interacting with the documents. So, all right, so getting back, other tech, you know, we use Spring Central for soft phones. In the future, we may switch to Zoom phone. Zoom has a good phone system. No, most organizations right now are just using cell phones. We use Google Hangouts for chat. We're not super happy with it. Finding something for chat can be really helpful. We use OneDrive for files that aren't Google Docs or Sheets whenever we need to do files. So, and we've been using this one-to-one meeting format. I actually picked up from John Pearson. He wrote this book, Mastering the Management Buckets. And John Pearson often will attend the Barnabas group, Orange County. And what it does is it, you know, it feels kind of overprescribed, but it just makes sure that you're covering all your bases. And so this is available at this link down here. You can download a free template. And you know, you may adapt it to your own situation, but it's helpful just to have this personal section and then have, you know, updates with people. So, and then some of the other technology expectations, I think I covered a lot of this. You can get a nonprofit Zoom discount at this organization called TechSoup. And yeah, so some of the other things, and I think some of this may be harder to do right now, but if, you know, we end up doing this for several months, you know, you might need to have these conversations. You know, as much as possible, I tell staff while working from home, what you need to do is try to treat it just like you would at work. You know, try to have boundaries around work time as if you're at work. It's much more difficult if you have kids at home like we do. So, you know, what we end up doing, and I've seen a lot of people that I've talked to, is you end up having a longer work day, but then you have a lot more breaks in your work day. And the, you know, if you do timesheets, you can use that through, you know, Google Sheets. We encourage our staff to take frequent breaks to avoid burnout. And, you know, parents with young children, it's just going to be a challenge. So, yeah. So let me go ahead and open it up for chat and see if people have some questions by chat. So I'm going to pull up the chat window. Yeah, so some people mentioned that Microsoft Teams is a good good option for chat. Other people use Slack. Workplace for nonprofits, I'm not as familiar with that. So Workplace for Nonprofits has a good chat feature. Any other work tips or challenges or questions that you have? Someone asked, how do you share task lists? We actually have decided to go a lower tech method. So you can do shared tasks. I think Teams has things like that. We actually just prefer to use the Google Docs, and then we'll manage our task list within Google Docs, because it's easier to hyperlink between documents. It's easier to update. But if you have a good shared task system, then, you know, use that. So someone else recommended Flock and Trello for task lists, and we've tried, I don't know, 5 different. I don't know that we've used some of the latest ones, but a few years ago we tried a bunch of them. Someone else also mentioned that Salesforce has a free CRM, customer relationship management, for nonprofits. We've used that in the past too. So, so this webinar will be available for people who aren't on during this time. So Any other questions before I move? The next part, I think, is going to be the part that people are going to probably be most interested in. And, you know, I didn't have it in the initial announcement because the CARES Act hadn't come out. But let me go ahead and continue. So the CARES Act was passed this past Friday. It's the largest relief act ever passed in U.S. history. People have said it's probably going to have the largest impact on nonprofits in U.S. history. What makes it unique is there's no restrictions on faith-based organizations, and I'm still working with some experts I know on religious rights and religious freedom, but from my understanding, a lot of churches are going to be applying for the forgivable loans in this. So, you know, as many of you had talked about what your concerns were, and your concerns were, you know, kind of summarized in this CNN. You know, their headline's a little bit strong. You know, COVID-19 could be an extinction event for many charities, or could mean extinction for many charities. It's going to be rough, and you know, we're going to have to figure out how to weather it. And you know, one of the other articles that I recommend people looking at, Andy Crouch, the former editor of Christianity Today, he wrote an article, said, "Leading beyond the blizzard, now every organization is a startup." And really what he talked about in that article was, is this a blizzard? Is it a long winter? Or is it a 12 to 18 month mini ice age? And that's what a lot of people are concerned. I think most people now are concluding this is going to be more on the, you know, mini ice age. This isn't going to be a short blizzard. So, you know, how do we adapt? One of the biggest tools that's happened is this CARES Act. So it was passed on Friday, March 27th. And the part that you want to pay attention to is this Paycheck Protection Program. It's $349 billion to nonprofits and small businesses for those that are under 500 employees. And what it does, the kind of the punchline is, it provides loans to equal 2.5 months of average payroll, and that also can be used to cover rent or mortgage payments, that can actually convert to a grant, so through loan forgiveness. And there's a lot of qualifiers in there. I'm going to give a quick highlight, but we have a free course at nonprofitcovid19.org, and we have a section that goes into details. I've collected all the best webinars that are out there. Right now, the best one out there is by the ECFA, the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. You can register on their site and get free access to that. But the way you do this is you work with just whoever your current bank is. So most banks will be a small business lender, and you will just apply through them. They will give you the funds, and then if you meet the basic requirements, then you can get the loan converted into a grant. Now, the biggest requirement to be aware of is this one here, is your loan forgiveness is reduced proportionately if you reduce your number of full-time employee or FTEs. I think it's FTEs. It might be employees, but I think it's FTEs. And if your organization's already laid off some people, then you can bring them back within 30 days of the loan. The other qualifier is they give you 2.5 months of average payroll, but you only have 60 days to spend it in. And then you can get that money basically forgiven. So if some of the other details to be aware of, and this is really, I'm giving you the cliff notes because I could give a whole nother webinar on this, and I have a recording that's about 20 minutes going over this, but there's several recordings that are an hour and a half going through the details. So they have some other things. The employee retention credit for organizations, they're 50% or more shut down. It also has provisions to delay employer portion of payroll tax. There's a different loan program that's not forgivable called the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loans, but you can apply for a $10,000 emergency grant if you apply for that. And even if you don't get the loan, you still get the grant. And then the other act that was passed was the Families First Act, and that provided paid sick and family leave reimbursable by federal government. Another thing, I think everyone's been hearing about the checks that are going to be coming paid to individuals. But I would encourage you to go to this nonprofit COVID-19 course. And we have links to the best materials out there. Now, one other thing for those of you who were concerned about fundraising, they're doing some pretty substantial tax benefits for fundraising, and I can't remember them all offhand, but the biggest one is $300 that people can deduct from their taxes without itemizing their taxes, so that's going to help the small donors. But the other thing, on the large donors, normally they limit them to 60% of their income can be deducted, but this year they're allowing them to give 100%, and if they want to give more, they can carry it over for up to 5 years. So you know, you might see a loss in donations, but you might see an increase from some of these provisions of the small donations and the very large donations. So let me just pause for a minute here and see if folks have any questions on that. So any questions or comments? And just if you do have questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. If you can't see the chat window, there's at the bottom, if you highlight over the Zoom window, you should see a chat window there. Yeah, so someone asked, do you have a summary doc of the COVID-19 relief package you can email or make available for download? So yes, that's available at this nonprofit covid19.org page. Now, the tax benefits for donors, and I'm probably not going to get all this exactly correct. So the ECFA, towards the end of their presentation, they go through this in more detail, but the two big ones, as I understood it, were people can give. Normally, if you give, you have to itemize your taxes to get it deducted. But they're going to have $300 that people can give, that they can deduct that on their taxes without itemizing. And the other is for major donors that might want to give 100% or more of their income in that given year. Normally they can't get all of that deducted from their taxes, but this year they can not only get all of that deducted from their taxes, but they can carry that donation over to 5 years. So if you get someone who's feeling, you know, someone who's very wealthy and they want to say, you know, I'm going to give you what I make in the next 5 years, I'm going to give that to you this year, then they could deduct that for the next 5 years. And as I mentioned, the ECFA webinar that is available for free online, and we have links to it on our nonprofit COVID-19 course. It has more details on that, and there's also links to documents that provide details. And we'll have a copy of this presentation on the website. There's going to be a webinar section of the website. So, all right, I'm going to keep going. And so I'm going to go through this quickly, but I want people to keep this in mind. We don't have as many organizations that are serving the homeless or still serving clients, but there's a lot of ministries that are still serving. And, you know, these are homeless shelters, recovery programs, places that, you know, essentially, if you have people staying there, you know, they're treated like hospitals in many ways, and you can't just, you know, send them out because they don't have anywhere else to go. So there's a lot of examples of what ministries are doing. I'm not going to go into all the detail, but you can look through this list of, you know, what the ministries are doing. They're doing a lot of, you know, risk minimization in the process. You know, a lot of these organizations are still serving meals, but they've stopped serving warm meals. They'll do bag lunches and things along those lines. And a lot of these organizations are being hit, and many of you probably are being hit, where there's increased demand during this time. It costs more to try to keep people safe, and you know, you're not getting additional revenue. If anything, you're losing revenue. The summary, if you have a confirmed case of COVID-19 in your organization, is you need to contact your local health officials. So most cities will have a a health director, and you want to work with them to coordinate with that. So there's been several homeless shelters that have had this happen, and whenever I did this presentation a week ago, there's only 2, and as of yesterday, there's 5. So I think that, you know, before this is all done, a lot of the shelters are going to have cases. And I think in the end, many of the people who are working in the front lines, it's going to be, you know, like September 11th, where, you know, people are putting their lives at risk serving, and, you know, they are doing it because that's what they're called to do. And I think we need to remember to honor them. With that, I just want to give a quick overview of some of the material in the COVID-19 course that could be helpful for people. And so let me pull up that material for you real quick. So what we've tried to do in this course, so I'm a researcher, you know, my background is MIT. I have been running an online school for 12 years, and I said, why don't I put my research background to help out in this case? And I've been spending, you know, since COVID hit, probably 3/4 of my time going through. And what we have on this site is each section is basically broken up into 3 parts. There will be a presentation. So, you know, this presentation that I just did on maintaining healthy relationships, we have a section there. Then we have usually some links. And then in the bottom, I have some third-party presentations, from some of the best organizations. So this is on healthy relationships. Many of you asked about the government loans and the CARES Act. So on the website, I have a summary presentation that's going to go in a little more detail than what I just provided. And then you have this link to the ECFA CARES Act. So you can go here, and then you can just register on their website for free, and then you can get access to that. The other organization that has the best resource is the U.S. Chamber Foundation. So their presentation, aside from the ECFA, is the best one. I have that one linked down here. The U.S. Chamber Foundation, they have a lot of resources on their site. They have the emergency loan guide. That's the best probably download that you're going to get on this. And then there's an application. If you want to understand what does the basic application look like, that's available. It's linked here. And what you would do is you'd fill out this application. You need to look through the details of what you're going to, you know, certify. One of the things that you have to certify is that the current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary for the operations of the applicant. I think most nonprofits and ministries has enough uncertainty to be able to say, yes, that's the case. Even if it's not immediate for this current, you know, right now, it's going to affect you, you know, over the long haul. So that's some of the resources that are on there. We have a lot of analyses by lawyers. So I'm not a lawyer, so that's part of why I'm just trying to do a summary and then point you to a lot of the experts that have covered that. For those of you who are in ministries that are very concerned about religious freedom and don't normally take government grants, we don't normally take government grants. We're going to be taking this. Churches, you know, don't take government grants kind of by definition usually, but a lot of churches are going to be taking this. And, you know, some people have asked, why is that justified? And I think that the reason why that's justified is if the government's telling a church that it needs to shut down, or a ministry that it needs to shut down for public health reasons, then, you know, that's going to result in a loss of revenue and potentially having to lay off people. So I believe that it is justified. And ultimately, what the government's trying to do in this Paycheck Protection Program is they're trying to keep people employed in all types of jobs, because they don't want to all of a sudden have, you know, 20 or 30% of the workforce laid off. So what they're trying to do is create incentives for that. So, and then we have some other resources. So we have a fundraising toolkit on here. We're going to be you know, collecting more and more resources, but there's a lot of different resources out here on fundraising. There's some COVID-19 grants. Depending on your organization, you may or may not qualify for those. And then one of the other things that might be helpful that we developed is a planning toolkit of, how do you actually get a coherent plan for how you're going to respond to this. So we have a lot of resources. If you're familiar with the Lean Startup or Business Model Canvas, those tools are pretty applicable these days. And I talk a little bit about how we actually use those tools in building this course. And then we have other resources for churches, for online teaching, for schools. And one of the big issues also is around HR with this. There's a lot of HR law, especially around sick leave that's changed recently. So we have some materials on that. And then, how are you going to do cash flow projections? And I think that's going to be one of the biggest issues is organizations, not planning their cash effectively. So I think the short-term solution for cash crisis is going to be the CARES Act for a lot of organizations, because it's going to provide essentially 2.5 months budget or 2 months budget for a lot of organizations. But the long term, if this goes on and it is, a mini ice age of 12 to 18 months, and it's probably going to affect the economy for longer than that, then we need to be doing effective cash flow planning. So with that, I'm done a little bit early, but I want to open it up for questions. And let me just see. Okay, let me just go through some of the questions that people had. Okay, so will we be able to qualify if you have money in the bank? I think that the real question is, can you answer this question here? The current economic uncertainty makes this loan necessary to support ongoing operations of the applicant. We have money in the bank in our situation, but if we didn't get this loan and forgivable grant, we would probably have to consider laying off people. And from that perspective, I believe I'm going to be able to say the economic uncertainty makes it so that I need this, right? And so does this apply to all nonprofit organizations that serve people overseas? Okay, the key factor on this is you need to be a 501c3 in the United States. So if you're a 501c3, and if I remember right, the person whose salary that you're paying, their primary residence has to be in the United States, I believe, is one of the qualifiers. So the ECFA covers this fairly well. The presentation is the presentation in course just for nonprofits. The targets for nonprofits, ministries, and churches. This section that I have in a lot of these resources about the CARES Act for businesses, this payroll protection program is basically exactly the same or almost exactly the same for nonprofits and businesses. So if you know someone in a small business, you want to let them know about this, because I know a lot of people who are in small businesses, they're about to shut down because of the cash flow crunch on this. And if they're in a small business of less than 500 employees, then this can be a lifesaver for them. So great options for running online multi-day conferences in terms of software or platform. Well, a lot of organizations are moving to virtual conferences. I am trying to actually participate as many virtual conferences as possible to see how they're going. I'm going to be doing a webinar, or not a webinar, I guess a workshop for the Christian Leadership Alliance. And I'm going to be observing how they're doing it. If I were doing it, I would have them record the presentations. I would do, you have to figure out, are you going to do it parts of it live, or are you going to do all of it pre-recorded? I think CLA decided to do all of it pre-recorded, and you'll have to sort that out. A lot of people are doing things by Zoom these days. I haven't seen a digital conference platform. There's a lot of association management software and websites that you can use, or membership management software and websites. So I would look to those type of organizations that do that. But and I'll try to find a little bit more information on conferences. So I will post this section to the chat window. So if someone asks this link to the course, especially the grants program, I'll post that here. And yeah, so talk more about religious freedom. Taking government funds is a big concern for many people. There could be strings attached that limit religious freedom. So the Alliance for Defending Freedom is having a webinar on that tomorrow. I'm going to post that to our website. All the people I've talked to basically say that out of anything that's ever come out from the government, this is the most flexible. Having said that, taking government funds is a little bit like, Christian's personal decision. Do you drink, even a sip of alcohol or not? And some people say, I'm not going to drink, even a sip of beer or a sip of wine. And then other people, will have, one glass of wine or one beer. And I think that's going to be a personal choice to your organization on, do you do this? Do you even, do this in this special case? Now, having said that, there are a lot of churches, some of the groups that I've seen. So the ECFA, they seem to be promoting this fairly actively, and that's, a fairly conservative evangelical group. Now, within the ECFA, I'm sure there will be some organizations that still won't take the government funds. One of the videos I linked here, and I'll actually show it, it's by this one down here, is by the Texas Baptist churches. I don't think of Texas Baptist churches as being, they're generally going to be pretty conservative on things, and they're promoting this within the Texas Baptist churches. So that's just that is an answer on that. Let me tell you. So we used to take government funds, and we ran into problems. And let me tell you that the types of problems that people are concerned about, that in what my current understanding is, and I'll let you know if this changes, because it could change. But one is, will this affect religious hiring rights? And my understanding is that it won't affect any sort of hiring rights at all currently. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm going to sit on this webinar to hear what they say, but that's my current understanding. Now, the secondary issue that you could run into is there's likely going to be audits, and the way the audits will work is the auditors, because this is going through banks, you'll never have to interact with the government typically, but because it goes through the banks will be audited. But as a part of the auditing of the banks on this, they may have to do sampling of some of the loans. So if there were 10,000 Christian nonprofits that did this, I'm sure some of them would probably get pulled in the samplings when the banks get audited. And that process itself can be, I can tell you, somewhat excruciating. So if an administration came in November that was hostile to religious freedom, the audits could happen under a different administration. And they can't change the rules, but what they can do is they can essentially change the enforcement if a new administration comes up. So that is the most advice I could give on religious freedom. But as soon as that video is available for the Alliance for Defending Freedom, actually the webinar I think is happening today, then I'll post that to the website. And I think they're going to have, and I've reached out to some of my friends who are the top experts in the country on that question, and I'll try to post more resources on that. But what I hear people saying is that this is really an exception to the rule in many cases because of the critical nature financially. Can you all hear? Okay, so it sounds like other people can hear. So, all right. Other questions that people have? So what I'm going to do for this next part, because I know it's a little awkward to do everything by group chat. If people want to, and we'll first try to, if you just want to unmute yourself one at a time, and if you want to ask some questions or talk about some of the issues you're most concerned about, then just, you can unmute. It's, if you highlight over the Zoom window, it's in the bottom left, and you just press the mute and unmute button. You can unmute yourself, and if you want to jump in with some questions or comments, or, you know, also part of what's helpful is just to share how is COVID-19 affecting your organization. So. Russ, do you want to jump in of how COVID-19 is affecting your organization, just to start us off?
No, I'd love to. One, it's great. Dan just wrote a post on the chat group just saying there's a lot of details on this website on these references. So, want to encourage you to dig into that. And thank you, Andrew, for sharing that site. We will send out the link to that as well as the slides. Our organization, I work with an international organization, and our first 2 weeks has been just trying to figure out what we're doing. I use the word we got paralyzed a little bit. We had people traveling, we had a lot of things coming up, and it really took us 2 weeks to kind of catch our breath, figure out how we're going to operate, get everyone connected, get into some rhythm, and really this week we began to get a flow. Working remotely was something we've done regularly, but trying to support, we have about 70 staff living overseas, support that staff in every country having some pretty extreme limitations, and then trying to find out how do we serve. We work in the poverty space. How do we continue to serve the needs of the poor while being under these limitations? It took us 2 weeks to get our head up out of the sand, and now we have some small things going. Our staff is healthy. We're able to communicate, and we kind of are finding some rhythm. But it really took us 2 weeks to figure out how to go. And had we had some of these tips and tools 2 weeks ago, it would have been a quicker on ramp. But now we're kind of in a rhythm. And again, it's really difficult to plan. But each of the countries that we're working in is able to adapt based on the changing rules and restrictions in each country.
Okay. Yeah. That's, I mean, I can imagine how complicated that must be with people in so many countries. And yeah, it has to be challenging. Other people, how are your organizations adapting?
Yeah, this is Lynn Dobesy. We do international teacher training conferences in school districts, and you can bet that administrators don't want to send any teachers that would be a part of a big conference. So if Russ is able to figure his out in 2 weeks, I'm going to give him a call, because we have not yet. But yeah, total disruption. So we do have teachers on the ground that have already been trained. So we're trying to figure out how to network with them on Skype calls and on Zoom calls and that sort of thing, so that they can continue. But school's out, so their world is upside down as well. So a lot of figuring right now.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, that does sound challenging. And if your organization that mainly does training, yeah, I mean, I feel for, trying to figure out how to adapt, and can you do that remotely, and what can you do, and it's changing how we operate. I mean, I can share a little bit for us, because we're an online school. A lot of people have said they didn't expect it to affect us at all, but how it affects us is our students, a good portion of our students are running Christian homeless shelters, and we are expecting about a 20% drop in our enrollment. And currently we've had a good number of students who've dropped because they said, it's not quite as crazy as the hospitals are right now, but they're, some of them are having to go into quarantine. Some of them are, they're dropping their high risk staff So all of a sudden, 30% of their workforce is gone and they have to do the same type of thing. Some of them have talked about, if it gets bad enough, will they have to bring in the National Guard to be able to help staff their organizations? Because, if you're housing 1,000 homeless folks, you can't just kick them all out and just say, sorry, it's, and it's just a big strain for for them. So, yeah. How about other folks?
We're putting more emphasis on donor care. So writing a lot more thank you notes and making phone calls to people just to check in with them and see how they're doing. And then obviously doing a lot more with Zoom meetings rather than one-on-ones. But this has been super helpful. I have another Zoom meeting, and actually there's two different ones that Kathy and I will be attending in 10 minutes about one on grants in this environment, and then another one on COVID-19 relief packages. So, but thank you for hosting this.
Yeah,
really,
definitely.
Really
Byron, I'm interested to hear, how are your donors responding? I've been concerned that a good number of donors may be saying, my business may be gone, or I may be bankrupt, or some may be responding generously also, but how are you seeing people respond?
Yeah, so far we've had, I think, 3 or 4 people that have asked to stop their recurring donation, monthly donations, and all of those were fairly small. So that was, very not a problem. But they're all, small business people or their own business. We've had some generous giving this week as well. That was, a really nice confirmation that God is still there and still loves ministry, right? And it'll be interesting, if this turns into like a blizzard, like you talked about. How does that impact? We have a lot of donations from churches, and so if their budgets start going down, then that could impact us, obviously. And
right.
Then we have a large concern for our friends and our partners and our brothers and sisters in India, and how all this is going to impact them. And so watching the news from there and Skyping with them more regularly than we would normally do.
Yeah, it seems that is one of the themes that I've heard, is just people are just trying to be a lot more relational all the way around, whether with donors or with staff or things along those lines. So other people, how's your organization responding and adapting?
I just wanted to add a little bit to what Byron said too. I find that my prayer times are longer, more intense, and happen more often during the day, because now I'm really focusing on everybody else. I mean, I don't, my own issues or whatever, but focusing on so many others that don't have capabilities or access or anything like that. And I find that to be really gratifying, that I feel like I'm really just in the middle of God's will, in the middle of just praying and praying for people who need just basic essentials. And whether that's here or abroad, anywhere. And I feel like God just brings people to my mind during the day, and I stop and I pray, because it's just where we're living in right now. So that's been good, I think, for me, but it's also been really good for others. So.
Yeah, that's a good word.
One of the things that's kind of interesting at this time, I think Tony Evans has a talk called When God Shouts. And there's a sense that the world has been brought to their knees by this little bitty virus in this wayward town called Wuhan that's caused the entire world to go crazy. And we've been thinking about this. There's never been a time then when the whole world has ever had a worldwide revival. I mean, there were, the New Testament times, the known world at that time, but there was stuff outside the known world that they knew. And so to me, there's an opportunity for the church to really step it up. A friend of mine, Walt Wilson with GMO, said that they're response rates for people coming to Christ now in the U.S. have gone from 10% to 18% on their websites at this point. And I think worldwide it's going to be something that's going to happen through this as the church raises up, embraces that. Someone else said that the church has probably had more productivity and creativity and change in the last 30 days than it has in the last 30 years, having to learn and adapt and try new things. So I'm interested in the opportunity for the kingdom, the gospel, the advancement of things once we come out of our storm cellars, if you will, and see what's going on. How is the church going to respond? How do we look at the new world that we're embracing, the Kairos moment right now, where people are scared and they're most vulnerable and they're most open to the gospel? Those are kind of the questions I've been thinking about.
Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, I think that, as challenging as things are, there's also opportunity. And, we've gone through a collective global learning curve on remote work and remote education and remote ministry. And, a lot of people who thought that they are invulnerable do not feel they're invulnerable right now. And so that's a good word. So Russ.
Yeah, hey, I'd love to just make a comment, and then you're welcome to stay on. I'm going to thank Dr. Sears just for this time. Again, thank you for the incredible link to resources. I want to encourage you to take a look at that. Again, we're going to send out a short little survey, but we'll also send out later the video and the slides and the notes so you can go and do that research. But listen, we're also going to stay on. So if you want to stay on and continue conversation, Dr. Sears is willing to stay on and have this. I know some people need to sign off, but I want to thank you for joining us. We have another seminar coming up in 2 weeks. We'll send you information on that. But let's continue the conversation. Thank you for being with us. And Andrew, we can just continue if other people have comments or questions.
Okay, sounds good.